Welcome to Everyday Torah. I'm Trevor. This is Jacob. We are continuing the series on the way of the wanderer. So we're going to be camping out a little bit more in Ephesians chapter 2. So welcome, Jacob. We haven't been together. I think it's been like a month.
It's been a month.
Yeah, you had a little hiccup up in the hills.
Yeah. It was just too much going on up at the old homestead.
Okay, so is it? People have been praying for you. Is it sorted out?
Yeah, no, we're on the other side of it. It was the main thing was all the crazy logistical problems. Like we were out of propane because all the propane companies got snowed in or were on super backed up. And so it was really cool because, we ran out. And so we were having to go old school and boil water and put it in the tub and all that kind of stuff. Right. And we got an emergency delivery of only 14 gallons. And the tech told us, hey, this is average size house like what you guys got. This is probably going to last 7 to 10 days, but they'll deliver. And they never delivered because they just kept, other company kept getting backed up. And so, day 10 came and that the pilot light was still going. And then we got to day 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. We got to day 20 and that pilot light was still going. It went twice as long as it was supposed to go. And so, we finally got the propane tank filled on day 20 by another company. And Jamie and I are just like, I'm not going to be the first one to say it's a miracle, but it's like, that was legit, like twice as long as it should have lasted. So we're very gracious.
Yeah. Well, I think all of us appreciate that you don't jump into miracle land too quickly, but no matter how it played out, our Father took care of you. And we are very grateful for that.
Yeah. We're really, really thankful for warm showers. They're wonderful.
Now, if you start to walk through the little creek in your backyard and the water starts to separate, I'm going to think something's going on.
I'm still trying to find a good staff for that.
Okay.
I'll key you once I find a good Moses looking staff. I'll show you the video of it not working, and then we can post that on the YouTube channel. Okay.
All right, I've digressed this long enough. Okay, so am I going to Ephesians 2? Is that where I'm starting?
Yeah, so we're at Ephesians 2. And the goal today is to really wrap up what we started last time, which is we have addressed what it means to walk like Yeshua walked and to walk in the works that were prepared beforehand for us. And we're saved by grace through faith, not of works. So where we're at now is verse 11. So Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11. And this session, I'm titling it, Ending the Dividing Wall of Hostility, the Wanderer Finds Their People. And we're going to dig into this dividing wall of hostility. It's one of those passages that's used incorrectly, or I should say interpreted incorrectly, and then also applied incorrectly. And we're going to talk about finding the us being wanderers, finding where we ultimately are a part of a people, the people of God, the family of God. We've been talking about family. So
Jacob, if I might catch people up, the little preamble that you were talking about there is Ephesians 8, 9, and 10, that we're saved by faith, not of our works. No one can boast. It's a gift, but it was a price paid for us by our Messiah. But we were created, verse 10, to do good works. And so as we move into this next little section, I think one of the prevailing views is that Gentile who didn't grow up with the Torah comes in by faith, but they still don't need to regard the Torah because the dividing wall has allowed people who are not lawful to continue not being lawful because they're saved by faith. So I want to catch people up, just the kind of idea that as you move through this, that's not what the text is saying.
No, not even close. It really isn't. A close scrutiny of it, something moving beyond a superficial, not to knock a 5 a.m. Bible study at a local, coffee shop, but you have to go deeper than a 5 a.m. Bible study at a coffee shop with your friends. Which, if you're doing that, keep doing that. That's good stuff. But this is you need to be more than the weekend warrior theologian here.
I am not. I can't even contain myself. I've seen this hundreds of times, and I want to listen in. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Do you even know what you're doing over there?
Right. I mean, it's good stuff because it's like, they're praying. You see those Bibles cracked open, and it's
for sure.
Flip to Genesis, go back to Genesis. And it's like, dang it, they're only living to the right of Matthew, but it's good. It's that at least they're in the word, right?
Sure.
That's like more than we can say for most of the world right now. At least they're in the word.
Absolutely.
So number one is we're just going to read the verse and it's beginning in verse 11. Therefore, remember that at one time, and I'm in ESV, by the way, therefore remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. So let's stop there. Couple of questions is, number one, who's being addressed in this section? I'm not talking about the entirety of the letter, but who does Paul focus his attention on here? It's very specific.
Yeah, Gentiles in the flesh.
Gentiles in the flesh, right? And he qualifies it. Gentiles in the flesh. So what he's getting at here is these are not children of Israel according to the flesh. These are Gentiles according to the flesh. And we all know that Paul in Galatians and other places, he's going to separate out this idea of fleshly descent, spiritual descent. And the two don't necessarily have to be the same. You could be a spirit-filled Israelite, physically descended from Abraham, but you can also be a spirit-filled Gentile, spiritually descended from Abraham. That's a whole Galatians argument. So, but we want to qualify terms here. This is really important. He's talking about Gentiles for a moment here. And there's a problem that he just out of the gate. The problem is that there is something not okay about being a foreigner to the commonwealth of Israel. And that's in the next verse, okay? Verse 12. So we start in verse 11, verse 12. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. So what's the problem? The problem is they're alienated from the commonwealth of Israel. It's a big problem. That's kind of weird because it's you're not just alienated from God. It's part of the problem is that you're alienated from being in this commonwealth of Israel, and you're foreigners to the covenants of promise. That's another problem. So it is a statement of fact Paul is making. If you are not in the commonwealth of Israel, you do not have access to the covenants of promise. What? I know that a lot of our listeners are probably like, well, yeah. Well, yeah, to you who've been following Torah, this makes perfect sense. But to somebody who does not think they have to keep Torah, this is a very profound statement.
Yeah. Is this also linked to Jeremiah? Jeremiah's new covenant language. I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah.
Where's the covenant with the Gentile nations in that statement?
It's not.
It's not there. It's glaring. It's like you and Gary last week on the podcast with Melchizedek, which is loved it. He talks about this thing in Ezekiel's temple where the discussion is what's perhaps even more remarkable is what's not there. What's not there? Not that you can make an argument from absence, but the fact that it's not mentioned is a glaring problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to maintain a certain type of theology and be adamant about something, it's like, well, this whole thing of, big word here, bilateral ecclesiology or supersessionism, where you have two different plans of salvation existing at the same time, bilateral ecclesiology, church, Israel, or you have supersessionism, which is the church replaces Israel. And there is no way either of those two theologies can hold up if you go to the text. They don't work, especially when it comes to the new covenant or any covenant. And Paul here in Ephesians is making that abundantly clear. If you are not in the commonwealth of Israel, you do not have access to the covenants of promise. That's a pretty, I know people are like, well, Jacob, I'm a Gentile. You're telling me I'm out? No, I'm not right. Saying that. What I'm saying is that prior to faith in Messiah, this is where you're at if you're a Gentile.
So first of all, I think you explained that easily. Anyone could understand that. Anyone can be adopted as sons or daughters by faith into the commonwealth of Israel, grafted in. Paul would use that language in Romans.
Yep.
That's all there. I think I would want to alert people that most evangelical churches, in my experience, do not subscribe verbally to a replacement theology or supersessionism. They'll tell you that, but if you listen to their actual theology and what they practice, it betrays that.
Yeah,
it's for me. I call it functional Marcionism, or function, and it's me being sarcastic, but it's kind of like, are you really sure that the God that you worship is Yahweh? Because
there's an identity crisis. That's why in the previous Way of the Wanderer series, my first thing was we need to qualify terms and we need to know who we're talking about here.
Yeah,
that it's an identity, and that's what Marcion had. He had an identity crisis. He was not able from the scriptures to see who Yeshua is. He missed it, and that's what led to, and that's the biggest thing. Is that I would argue the biggest thing in Christianity, quote unquote, is what do you do with the person of Yeshua? If you screw that up, everything else is screwed up. It doesn't matter how airtight of a systematic theologian you are. If you get the person of Yeshua wrong, you're not going to get anything else right. And this is the biggest problem is he throughout the Old Testament, he says, my people don't know me. And then the biggest question in the New Testament from the Pharisees and everybody else is, who is this person? Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the questions. So, to your point, the quote unquote evangelical Christianity and other Christian denominations, they will state that they are not replacement theologians. Some of them actually just outright say that. But I would say a majority of evangelical Christianity would not ascribe to that because they have a very high view of Israel, to the point that Americans provide more money to Israel than anybody else. So there's a very high opinion of Israel, but functionally they act as if they have replaced Israel when it comes to their theology. And according to Paul, the problem for Gentiles when you talk about replacing is that positionally, Gentiles begin outside the commonwealth of Israel and are strangers to the covenants of promise. So we see in Paul's theology here in Ephesians chapter 2 that if you're a wanderer, the problem is you're not in Israel. And that's just blanket statement. That's not that it was true when Paul wrote that, but it's no longer true now. It's just true, period. If you are not in Israel and you're a Gentile, positionally, you're a foreigner to the covenants of promise, which means that there is no salvation for you. That's why he flat out says you're without hope. You have no hope and you are without God. This is a big problem, right? That he doesn't qualify. He just says, if you're a Gentile, this is your problem. And by the way, if you could be in Israel and not have God, but Paul addresses this. He addresses it in Romans, he addresses it in Galatians, etc.
Yeah.
So you have this bad theology of replacement theology, supersessionism that Paul in Ephesians chapter 2, just right out of the gate, this is really this is not possible. And it's really sad because you have works like a Dialogue with Trypho by people like Justin Martyr, which contains so much anti-Semitism that it's just like, what is going on? But this is somebody who, if you were to ask an evangelical Christian who's educated, they would venerate Justin Martyr. They would say, oh yeah, it's a godly man. Okay, well, let's read a section from chapter 18. This is Justin Martyr's response. For we too would observe the fleshly circumcision and the Sabbaths, and in short, all the feasts, if we did not know for what reason they were enjoined to you, namely, on account of your transgressions and the hardness of your hearts. For if we patiently endure all things contrived against us by wicked men and demons, so that even amid cruelties unutterable, death, and torments, we pray for mercy to those who inflict such things upon us, and do not wish to give the last retort to anyone, even as the new lawgiver commanded us, which stop there. That tells you right there, Martyr does not have a clue who gave the law at Sinai. Just that statement right there, by saying the new lawgiver, he's already made a distinction between who gave Moses the law and Yeshua. He doesn't know who gave the law, and he doesn't know who the lawgiver is. Okay. Then he continues, how is it, Trypho, that we would not observe these rites which do not harm us? I speak of fleshly circumcision and Sabbaths and feasts. Basically, Justin Martyr's justification for not doing circumcision, Sabbaths, and the feasts is he says, well, these were given to you to punish you because of the hardness of your forefathers' hearts. And it's like, that's not true, because the commandments were given before the transgression of Israel. So that doesn't make any sense. Exodus 16 is before Israel screws up with the golden calf incident. All 10 commandments are given before the screw up at the golden calf incident. So that's just flat out not true, what he's saying.
If I may, on this one, just so listeners can catch up with you, Dialogue with Trypho, I want to say third century, probably second century, I think.
Ish.
Can't remember, but it is a kind of the Socratic method dialogue that Justin is having with a fictional Jew named Trypho,
Mm-hmm.
and he is conversing with Trypho to show him a Jewish person why Christians don't have a part with them. They messed up with God, and now talk about replacement theology. That I think the language goes so far as God dealt this way with you because you were stiff-necked, but now God is dealing with us because we have good hearts or circumcised hearts. He deals with us with grace and mercy, and
we're persecuted, and we bless people, inferring that you guys didn't do that. And it's very, if you take that, and again, this isn't a Justin Martyr basting session. This is simply, I'm quoting this passage to show how irreconcilable it is with a text like Ephesians 2.
Indeed.
It's
Indeed.
completely irreconcilable with it, because he says it's us and you. And Paul says in Ephesians 2, If you are not a part of the commonwealth of Israel, you have no hope, you have no access to the covenants of promise, and you're without God. So with respect to Justin Martyr, he's wrong.
Yeah, and you mean that with respect. We respect that someone, he loved Jesus, and he's a product of his time, because as we discussed earlier, that he probably read things like letters to the Magnesians, or letter
Ignatius.
to the Magnesians by Ignatius of Antioch. So he's a product of his time. They're trying to figure it out.
Quartodeciman controversy is building and raging in this time frame. And that's for the people who kept the Sabbath on the 14th, by the way, versus the Passover on the 14th, versus those who didn't and wanted to move it to a Sunday. Well, not Sunday, but yeah.
All that to say is, though we respect these folks and some of the things that they went through, we just cannot agree with their theological outcomes, because it's not scriptural.
No, it's not scripturally backed. And so it's sad. Because people who are wandering, if they were to read that work by Justin Martyr instead of the scriptures, which unfortunately our culture right now, the tendency is to read the self-help book, to read the cool new pop culture references, the new authors that are the New York Times bestsellers. I'm not saying don't read those. What I am saying is you better have a really good mastery of scripture before you start soliciting information from other people, just to make sure that they're lining up with what scripture actually says. And this is one of those instances that it doesn't line up, even with the New Testament. I mean, it doesn't even pass muster from Paul, who Justin would have allegedly gotten a ton of his theology.
Well, the natural human tendency is, these are ancient people and they were closer to the situation. They must know more than me. These are the apostolic or church fathers, is what they would. Right. So they have these titles that are lofty. And so people just think, well, they must have known, they were closer to the situation.
They must have known. And that's not necessarily true. So what we have here is, I think we've firmly established that where errant theology can rise up. So we move on to verse 13 now of Ephesians chapter 2. So the problem is you're alienated from the commonwealth if you're a Gentile. But now, so something happened here. But now in Christ Jesus, in Yeshua HaMashiach, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. So this theme of far off and near, this is a frequently occurring phrase throughout Scripture. You see it in places like Deuteronomy 20:15, Deuteronomy 28:49, Isaiah 5, verse 26, Isaiah 57, verse 19, Joel 2:32, Micah 4, 1-5, Acts 2:39, which is merely a quotation of Joel and Isaiah when Peter's giving his Shavuot address. Okay, so this idea of far off and near, there's two categories here. The near refers to Israel, or around, in and close to Israel, but most likely in most of these passages, it's either explicitly stating it's Israel or it's the immediate vicinity of Israel. But then you have the far off, a nation far off, people from far off. I will bring your sons from far off. So it's basically you're either near and in, or you're far off and out. So that's where Paul's getting this language from. It's a turn of phrase. And if there's so many ways to translate it, you could just, you may not necessarily see far off. Somebody might say far away in a translate, but it's the concept is you have these two categories. Okay. So what Paul is doing is he's bringing back this concept that the audience, if they have read the scriptures, and I don't even like saying, one of the things in seminary, I would type Hebrew Bible as a replacement for Old Testament, because I don't like the word Old Testament because it infers that it's not relevant anymore. But the problem is I can't even say Hebrew Bible anymore because what if I'm a Gentile? Like it's still the word of God, right? So I've unfortunately come full circle. Like now I use Old Testament, New Testament again, because Hebrew Bible sounds almost like it's for the Hebrews. It's not for our instruction. It's for the Hebrews. And so anyways, so I'm saying Old Testament again. I don't know what to do, Trevor.
I don't, I just say Tanakh.
Yeah, this Tanakh's a good one. Yeah. But then people look at me and are like, what's that? And you're like,
I know, but
Old Testament.
What am I left with? I know.
You could be really crazy and say Pentateuch, but then nobody knows what's going on. So you have these passages, right, that speak of being near and far off. So Paul, what he's saying here is, but now in Messiah. Oh, so it sounds like Paul's got a solution to the problem. Okay, or is at least relaying the solution to the problem. You who were far off and have been brought near. So we have two groups. Okay. The far off would be the Gentiles. The near would be presumably the commonwealth of Israel.
Now, I like how you phrase that, because you didn't say Jews. You said commonwealth of Israel. And connotatively, there's a distinction there.
There's a big distinction, a big distinction between those two. Because when you say Jew, it really destroys the context of who the plan of salvation is brought forth from and who the covenants are struck with. The covenants are struck with Israel and Judah, but they're viewed as parts of a whole. So the new covenant is struck with house of Judah, house of Israel in Jeremiah 31. But that's because at the time there was two separated kingdoms. So it's the whole house of Israel, and it goes on to talking, in Ezekiel, that they're going to be two is going to become one in his hand. That what Ezekiel plays out, he takes two sticks and he puts them together. So the covenant is always with the physical descendants of Abraham in that regard. But as Paul in Galatians expands that definition, right? Talking about the children of the Spirit versus the children of the flesh. So, and in Romans, it's the doers of the law who shall be justified. So what it means to be an Israelite is the greater question. What does it truly mean to be an Israelite? And so for Paul here in Ephesians, he's saying what Messiah has done is he's brought those who are far off near into the commonwealth by the blood of Messiah.
So are you saying that there is a dividing wall between the far offs and the nears? Those are the two groups, and those who are far off are brought near, and now there's no dividing wall.
There's no dividing wall, and that's the next verse here, right? So that's for he himself is our peace. He's our shalom, who has made us both one and broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. Now here's the verse 14 and verse 15 are the ones that get ripped out of context. Okay. Verse 15, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, quote unquote, in parentheses, between the two, and might reconcile us both to God in one body on the cross, thereby killing the hostility. And he came and preached peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who are or were near. So there's this dividing wall that exists that he broke down in his flesh. Now, the $1 million question, what exactly is this dividing wall of hostility? And that's what we're going to flush out. So I'm a wanderer, and let's just say I see this wall, a dividing wall of hostility that prevents me from being able to be a part of the Commonwealth of Israel. What is that? What is it really? And the traditional explanation is that the law of commandments is the law given at Sinai. And I'm not even going to say Mosaic law anymore because it's not Moses's law. That's a problem. If you say that, what you're functionally, I don't say you're functional, but what you're aiding and abetting in is a misunderstanding of whose law it is. We need to become more specific in qualifying terms. So I'm going to say the traditional explanation of this passage by the church, quote unquote, is that the law of commandments is the law given at Sinai by Yahweh. And they argue that that's what Paul is saying was abolished. They're saying that it's the law that is the hostile point to Gentile inclusion. So that's what you ask anybody who, I won't even say a lay person, quote unquote, but if you ask somebody who is educated enough in this passage and they are in traditional Christianity, this is what they're going to say. Line and file. This is the response. The massive problem with this statement is Romans 3:31. So this is one of those moments where if you'd read Romans first, you would never be able to come to the conclusion that the law Paul is saying was abolished is the law given at Sinai. And this is what happens when you have commentators who just live in one field of specialty. There's no point of connection with the other texts. There is no way. I mean, I'm assuming you probably just flipped over to Romans 3:31. So do you want to read that for us, Trevor? Go ahead and read
Sure.
Romans 3:31, just so they know I'm not reading from some magical different Bible.
Yep. Paul writes, do we then nullify the law through faith? May it never be. On the contrary, we establish the law. So,
and some translations will say, do we abolish this law? No. And then at the end, it'll say, we uphold the law. So and it translators, flavor of the month there for the translator, but it conveys the point. So does anybody else in the room see the massive problem here by saying that in Ephesians 2, which would have been written, there's almost unanimous agreement on this, Ephesians was written before Romans. Romans is considered probably next to, if not one of the last letters Paul wrote, with 2 Timothy probably being the last letter. But Romans is considered the capstone of Paul's theology. So how does Paul, is he like theologically short on reaching the full conclusion in Ephesians chapter 2, but he changes his mind in Romans chapter 3? That makes no sense. He himself says he was taught by the risen Lord. So, and he also received instructions from the disciples. He talked with Peter, James, John. He worked with Barnabas. He worked with Stephen. He obviously was there when Stephen died, but he would have heard of what Stephen was talking about. So, this is not a guy who grew up in a vacuum, unaware, and simultaneously the people who were his contemporaries were not unaware of what Paul was saying. So this is a massive change in doctrine. This is a 180 change in doctrine. If Paul is saying the law was abolished in Ephesians 2, but it's not abolished in Romans 3. It is so It's one of those passages that, like, when anybody who says Paul is antinomian, anti-law, he ends his life being pro-law. That's at the very least, you can go that far. So this is one of those moments where you would never come to that conclusion, friends, if you read Romans and then you read Ephesians. You would never come to this conclusion. And it's one of those moments that if you know Greek, you get really upset with the translators that aren't consistent. So last night I was doing a word study because I want to check this stuff and see when these changes happen. The verb that's used in Ephesians 2:15 for abolishing is katargesas. And it gets translated as abolishing. It's in the participle form. So if you're running or if you're jumping, that's a participle. It's different than I ran, which would be a past tense. So it gets translated here as abolishing. Okay, abolishing the between the two parties. I'll read it in the context. It's verse 15, by abolishing the law of commandments. Okay. Now, here's the thing, and what's upsetting. It's the same verb in Romans 3:31. It's just a different type of the verb. So you have katargreomen, which is simply the first person plural. So we are doing something. So in this sense, in this case, it's the plural first person, which gets translated as, do we abolish the law by this grace or by this faith? No. So the translators change the English word between texts here. And most people don't even know their Bible well enough to think back into Romans 3. Just call it for what it is, folks. A lot of people don't. I hope this audience is different. Know your Bible. But if you're reading Ephesians 2, if the translators wanted to remain consistent, and there's no justification for changing the word, it should just say, do we therefore, and some translations get it right, do we abolish this law? No. So when in Ephesians 2, it should say abolishing. It's the same word. So Paul's using the same language. So he's literally in Romans 3 and Ephesians 2, he is either bipolar and saying one thing one moment and another thing another moment over the span of like 20 or 30 years, or the law that was abolished isn't the law given at Sinai. And the text bears out, and this is what I like to do with my theology, is I like to rule out something can't be. We may disagree on what it could be, but let's be in agreement on what this can't be that was abolished. It can't be the law in Ephesians 2, the law given at Sinai. I want to be clear. It can't be that law. It's so doggone frustrating, Trevor.
Oh, I know. I've lived it.
So the $2 million question is, if it wasn't the law given at Sinai that was abolished, what was abolished? So this is where we do a little bit of more detective work. So we get a little hint. To Paul's audience, it's probably a big hint. But to us, it's a little hint. In the phrase, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. Oh, well, the English word here translated in the ESV as ordinances is the Greek word dogmason. This is where we get the English word dogma from. Now, here's the thing. If you're actually digging into where this word appears in the Bible, it shows up 4 other times in the New Testament. And a Bible word search in Logos doesn't yield results in the Septuagint. But my understanding of what I've seen is that it is there. The universal agreement on what this verb or this word can connote or denote, it is never used to describe the Sinaitic law, ever. period. Specifically with the New Testament context, it gets used in Luke 2:1, Acts 16:4, and 17:7, here in Ephesians, and Colossians 2:14. It's ubiquitous, universal. It's referring to a man-made edict or the legal demand resulting from a decision or an infraction. Universal. It is never referring to the commandments of God. Now, some people would say, well, Jacob, Colossians says that the legal demands were nailed to the cross. Again, the details are really important. The law isn't what's nailed to the cross. It's the resulting infraction and legal demand, the result of the trespass against the law, your record of debt, that is nailed to the cross, not the law. This is a massive distinction between the two. So dogma, a resulting dogmatic decision, could be the result of an infraction against the law. That's fine in what the word can mean. It doesn't mean commandments. Universally in the New Testament, commandment is entolin and law is nomos. If Paul wanted to say it was the law that was abolished, he would just say by abolishing the law of commandments, period. He doesn't say that. He says abolishing the law of commandments expressed in dogma. So what is Paul talking about? And this is so important, and we do this in our culture really bad, folks. We need to be different. Don't rip statements out of context, and please finish the quote. It's like what Gary was talking about last week with Ephesians. We've been saved by grace through faith, not of works, lest anyone should boast. But he says, but you gotta, I'm trying to do my best Gary impression. You gotta finish the verse. It's a partial gospel if you don't do the last verse. Okay. I mean, and he's so right. You gotta finish the verse. Don't be a partial gospel person, folks. Finish the doggone verse expressed in ordinances. So what is being referred to by Paul? Some believe, and this is where we're going to explore what it could be. We've established what it can't be. The law is not done away with, folks. Okay, that can't be the option. Paul's own texts make that impossible. So let's work towards what it could be. I got two options. Okay, and I'm going to give what I think is seems to make the most sense. Some believe that this is some sort of physical, dividing wall that was described by Josephus in Jewish antiquities. So there's in portion 15.11.5. There's this soreg. So it's like this short wall. You can go to Josephus. You can look at how he describes it in that section. But there's a problem with that, and that was the part, the fence that kept Gentiles. And there's under pain of death. You can't go any further. Okay. Period. You go any further, it says your blood's on your own hands.
Hey, you can look it up on the internet. There's images of the little short fence because you have the court of the Gentiles. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's that little short fence, and you can see images of it. It's there.
You can see the quotation of the relief that has the infraction that if you cross it, it's the Romans' way of saying, look, if you're a foreigner and you cross this fence, we can't guarantee that you're not going to get killed by the Jews. It flat out, it's a posted thing. So some people say, well, that's what was being referred to. Okay, that's an option. The problem with that option is that the soreg was still physically present when Paul wrote Ephesians. It wasn't destroyed. So when he says he destroyed in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility, he can't, it makes a physical destruction of a physical wall not possible?
I'm going to say, because I've studied this before, that that little wall, though that's not what Yeshua was talking about, it is illustrative. In other words, it is a little physical object that could represent this bigger idea that you're talking about.
It's use it as metaphor.
Yeah. Oh, and that's all it was.
Yeah. Use it as metaphor. I mean, it's a physical wall, to be sure. But again, Paul flat out says in Ephesians, he destroyed whatever this wall is.
Well, what happens, Jacob, is that if people do think of that, is it Soric? I can't remember. Is that
Soric? Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, Soric. I've spelled it out. It's a Q at the end or something. I don't remember. But what they do is they also see it as metaphorical, but it's that it represents the commandments.
Yes,
those are gone, so that now the curtain is rent in two. We all now have free access to the temple of God, and the law, the commandments are gone. So all Gentiles who are lawless can now run in.
Right.
Yeah, that's how it's normally thought of.
Yeah, go read 1 John and you realize that's not possible.
It's not. It's right. It's irresponsible.
It's so much damage to the text because it's just you basically try to. Anyways, I want to be edifying. So it seems kind of silly to argue that Yeshua destroyed something that wasn't actually physically destroyed at the time. So the other option is the word that Paul uses might clue us in. It's phragmon. And it should be translated as fence, not wall. Fence is the better translation. Okay, so there's this dividing fence of hostility. If that's the case, we have a smoking gun because rabbinical Judaism consistently teaches the oral law is a fence around the Torah. Mm-hmm. Explicitly stated. You have Akiva who explicitly states that. So, actually, I think I still have the quote up. Yeah. So I'm just going to read a section here. So this is from a vote. They said 3 things: be deliberate in judgment, raise up many disciples, and make a fence around the law. That injunction, when expanded by another commentator of scripture, it's quote unquote, Rabbi Akiva said, jesting and levity habituate to lewdness. Tradition is a fence to the law. Tithes are a fence to riches. Vows, a fence to abstinence. A fence to wisdom is silence.
So, first of all, do you have it up? It's Mishnah. Yes. Is this the Mishnah?
This is from a research article I located. So I do not have the Mishnah up in front of me.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't have the, I always like for people to be able to go and look it up somewhere, but anyway,
I do not have that. No.
That's okay. And then, okay. Continue. So
we've got this fence thing explicitly stated in Mishnah, right? And specifically with a vote where it's there. Akiva tells you what it is. He explicitly tells you that tradition is a fence. And this is the problem that Yeshua is dealing with.
Okay, this might be helpful to some folks. So this fence, Jacob and I, if I'm speaking for you erroneously, tell people, but I'm not necessarily anti-fence in, I respect sort of what they were doing. For example, I have 2 boys. When they're growing up, I said, hey, you just don't have sex before you're married. Don't have sex before you're married. And one of the things I would do is I said, hey, when you're with a girl, don't take your shoes off.
That's good.
Because if you don't take your shoes off, you're less inclined to get in those positions where, and that's kind of the fence I was sitting around. Is there anything inherently wrong with taking your shoes off? No, but right. But you see what I was doing? I was creating a fence.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what Akiva says. He says, silence is offense to wisdom. If you keep your mouth shut, you can't be called a fool. And you might be thought wise. And that's what the proverb says.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is not stupid guidance.
Right.
It is actually wisdom. It is better. You know, the turn of phrase we use in our culture, better to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Right. Just keep your mouth shut if you don't know. And nobody will know if you're a fool. They may think you're a fool, but they can't prove you're a fool. Mm-hmm. But if you open your mouth and you prove that you're a fool, then everybody knows you're a fool. Yeah. So it's a fence. There's nothing wrong, quote unquote, with the fence. The problem was what the fence resulted in.
Yeah.
Because suddenly everything makes sense. If we're talking about the oral law as the fence, everything makes sense because this is exactly what the apostles and Yeshua himself were constantly fighting against, specifically the man-made dogmason traditions of the Pharisees. So consider Matthew 23:13. If you have your Bibles, flip there. Matthew 23:13. Oops. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for neither you enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Now I want you to consider Acts 15:5. And we'll read to verse 11. But some believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and order them to keep the law of Moses. How does Paul open up Ephesians 2? He says, you who are Gentiles by those of the circumcision. Okay. So now we've got a group in view here. And in chapter 24, verse 5, it's this, and really throughout Acts, it's like this circumcision group, the Pharisees, and then you see this in Paul's other writings, this circumcision group. So continuing verse 6, the apostles and the elders were gathered together to consider this matter, and after there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said, brothers, you know that in the early days God made a choice among you that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And God, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. And he made no distinction, no separation between us and them, having cleansed their hearts by faith. Now, therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? But we believe that we will be saved through the grace of Yeshua, our Lord, just as they will. So what do Matthew 23 and Acts 15 here have in common? Yeshua says, you guys don't enter the kingdom. You build this wall up. He doesn't say wall, but he says you don't enter and you don't allow other people to enter. And Peter puts the exclamation point on it and says, why are we going to give them this oral Torah that neither our forefathers nor us can uphold? We're saved by grace. What is Paul's language in Ephesians chapter 2? You're saved by grace through faith, not of works. You who were called uncircumcised by those called the circumcision. All the terms start to build into one another. So what did Yeshua destroy? Having said everything that I've said, if we're a wanderer and we're trying to be apart, we don't want to be away from the commonwealth of Israel. We want to draw near. But what had happened was that oral Torah was a fence It was a dividing wall of hostility that couldn't let Gentiles in. Is it represented by that physical wall at the temple? Sure. That's a physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. The Pharisees, with their fencing, made it impossible to get in, especially if you're a Gentile. It was difficult. And Peter flat out says, even the Pharisees couldn't do it, guys. Our forefathers couldn't carry this oral Torah. We're going to give it to the Gentiles?
Yeah, that's, I think, what Paul is addressing with Peter in Galatians 2, saying, hey, Peter, you're erecting that fence again.
Yep.
Don't do that.
Yep, because certain men came from James, and I don't think they were actually from James. I think they were saying they were from James. Okay, certain men come from James, and what does Peter do?
Oh, yeah.
He sets up that fence again.
He is.
He doesn't eat with the Gentiles. And what does Paul do? Gently pushes back his chair, stands up. What are you doing?
I just can't. I imagine me being chastised by Paul. Oh, no.
What are you doing? Like, I can chastise with the best of them, but dadgum. Like, that must have been so embarrassing.
But necessary.
But necessary and in love.
Yeah.
But that's what's going on. The law that was destroyed is not, or the dogma that was destroyed was not the law given at Sinai. It is the dogmatic tradition of the oral Torah that separated Gentiles from being able to draw near to God. And that's the language that gets used in Acts 15. Everything is completely copacetic. And here's the cool thing is that James confirms this later on in the text when he says he's about the people who are trying to draw or to turn to God. They're trying to come to him. Why are we going to put up a fence? This is not good. We shouldn't do this. And the capstone verse is, I want to come back to it, is actually, I mentioned it, is in Isaiah, Isaiah 57, verse 19. It's one of those prophecies. It says, I'm actually going to begin in verse 18. I have seen his ways, but I will heal him. I will lead him and restore comfort to him and his mourners, creating the fruit of the lips. Peace. Here's Ephesians 2 language. Peace, peace to the far and to the near. Yeah. And I will heal him. When Paul is saying peace to those who were near and peace to those who were far, he's quoting Isaiah 57 and the final redemption of Israel, and he includes those who are far into that final redemption. And this is where James in Acts 15 makes the statement by quoting from the Old Testament. After this, I will return and I will rebuild the tent of David that is fallen. I will rebuild its ruins and I will restore it, that the remnant of mankind may seek the Lord, and all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says the Lord, who makes these things known from of old.
Jacob, we're at that hour mark. I think that you wrapped it up just fine. And, way back when you were talking about Israel, and your language was that and not Jewish. I have students that will, I even had one over this last couple of days said, hey, I think I'm getting the idea that you're kind of this Messianic Jewish person and you're not easily categorized and you have some other, and I said, well, the Jewish word, I'm not actually trying to be Jewish. I'm trying to follow the commandments of my God, and I am grafted into Israel. I think I like Israel a little bit better because it's really hard to explain, because what happens is if people describe me as Jewish, what they do is there's a potential connotatively that they erect that fence. And that is not the goal of my life.
Right.
I want to be identified as one who understands how to walk in the commandments of my God. Mm-hmm. And, look, again, I respect some of the wisdom in some of the things that Rabbi Akiva is talking about. Yeah. But I say that, but there's some other unreasonable things that there's wisdom, and it's mixed in with some things that they're irrational fences. And I do think too that, we'll get on this on a whole nother day, but I think things even become more complicated when you talk about how circumcision became a fence, but yet it's still a law in the Torah, Leviticus 12:3. How do we reconcile that? But it should not be a fence, because it's not. No, circumcision is not a condition by which one can be saved or is saved. So, there's a lot of extra questions that we'll talk about in the future. But I just want to say how grateful I am to you for just our listeners that would pop into a podcast like this, and they're thinking through this dividing wall of hostility, and to hear a rational, easy explanation of what that was about is pretty cool for people. So I just want to say thank you for that. And
go ahead. Just last word next week. Yeah, for next week, or for next time, I should say. So what we're going to do now as the Wanderers is we're going to come to realize that we're no longer strangers, because we've come to know Yahweh. And we're going to see this realization that's a glorious thing, that back in Numbers chapter 1, verse 50, it says, when the tabernacle is set out, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And if any outsider comes near, he shall be put to death. But we're no longer outsiders. We're no longer strangers. We can draw near to the throne of grace with confidence. So that's for next time.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is at the end of our podcast where your internet starts to bug out on us. Oh. Maybe you have a throttle at the end of an hour. Who knows? Hey, everyone. Everyday Torah. It's about. It's not about that fence. It's about our Messiah who walked in the Father's commandments. And we're not talking about those ordinances and dividing walls and all that stuff. We're talking about those who are far off being adopted as sons and daughters of the Most High. And now we get to walk in righteousness in the same way that Jesus did. Our Messiah modeled it for us, and that's what we want to be about, and that's why we call it Everyday Torah. We'll see you next time.